Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for the warm words of welcome. What he said has prompted me to think that if 22 years ago somebody had thought of gathering the experience of those countries that had traversed their own road from dictatorship to democracy, maybe many of us would spare themselves the trouble and the difficulties we encountered in the next 20 years. There are more than one country in Europe that have transited from dictatorship to democracy. I hope that you will join in our debate actively. Greece is one of the countries that has had its difficult transition to democratic reform and opening to the world. Likewise, Portugal, it had its own difficult revolution and a change for democracy. These two countries are but part of the examples that Europe can give, the lessons that Europe has learned beyond the region of Central and Eastern Europe. But what happened to us in the 22 years of transition amounted to reckoning that the change that was so much aspired for and wished for back in the late 80s came unexpectedly for all of us. It was the least expected for those of us that lived this side of the Berlin Wall. Now that change is sweeping the Middle East and Northern Africa, I remember that years ago there was a small group of brave people who stood up in Egypt and said, they said enough, and nobody heard them. Many years passed until the moment came when people in Northern Africa and the Middle East overcame fear. Once you overcome fear, you get to know that your biggest choice is to live free or to live unfree in a world that we build for ourselves. Is there a need for a new constitution? When does it have to be formulated? Is there such a type of an electoral system which is the best electoral system that would work in every country? Which are the priority areas that need to be reformed? It is easier to reform healthcare than to reform the political system. What is more difficult? To build strong political parties and the civil society, or a serious social welfare system? What is the need to create conditions for an equal economic start so that everybody would get a fair deal and economic opportunities in society? How to ensure that not just 2% of society will be getting rich while 98% would be getting poor? How to overcome the tendency that we all are going to encounter, namely the tendency towards a brain drain? What do we do to initiate a broad nationwide dialogue between all parts of society in order to have consensus in its restructuring? How to avoid the spiral of violence? How to avoid blind vindictiveness? How to mete out justice based on the law rather than personal vindication? And another issue that remains open in Eastern Europe so many years after the changes is how to find the new place of the security forces in a society in order to subordinate them in service to society rather than allow them to become a parallel center of power. These are all issues that we have encountered time and again, and you are going to encounter time and again. I know that the students from Yemen perhaps regard all of these issues as something far away. It will take a lot of time to pass until they encounter them. But the earlier they start coming to terms with these issues, the easier the answers are going to be. Václav Havel, who regrettably cannot attend here today, has sent me a message saying very clearly, sending a very clear message to this conference: the rescue of mankind is in the heart of each one of us, in our ability to think, to be humble and responsible. You do not have to distort the truth in politics, but you need to be able to tell when, how, and to whom to tell that truth. Our gathering here today is the onset of a process in which all of us in Central and Eastern Europe and all of our friends in Northern Africa and the Middle East will gather together periodically to share experience, to tell each other what we have learned. We are not the ones to teach you. We are not the ones to export know-how, and you're not the ones that are here to listen to us. We're here to learn from one another, from each other's history, and our histories are interlinked. Europe is impossible without the Mediterranean, and the Mediterranean is impossible without Europe. Our cultures, our religions, our societies are closely interwoven together, and this link should remain stable and should underlie everything that we'll be doing from now on. The Prime Minister mentioned what Europe can do for you and the European Union. I said a few words about what I believe the countries of Central and Eastern Europe can contribute. I'm sure that there are many things that we haven't thought of yet that NATO can contribute in the reform of the security system, in supporting the process of opening up those systems, the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, which has played an instrumental role in conflict resolution. But ultimately, I look with great hope to the next speaker, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, which is the organization that we're not just pro forma member of in order to become members of the EU. It is one of the organizations that encompass all of Europe, many more member states than the European Union, in terms of guaranteeing human rights, the stability of our judicial systems, and making sure that the constitutions and the national legal framework would contain the kind of guarantee and assurances that would allow all of our citizens to express themselves freely and actively, and to be sure that their rights are protected by law. It is my great pleasure to give the floor now to the Secretary General of the Council of Europe.